I never thought love could turn into something so painful. When I was 7 months pregnant, my husband glared at me and said, "And this pregnancy? Now I don't want this baby." My heart pounded as I shook my head, refusing. That's when his anger exploded. He grabbed my hair, yanking me back before shoving me with all his strength. My belly slammed into the hard countertop, pain ripping through me like a knife. I gasped, tears filling my eyes as I collapsed onto the cold floor. And then what happened next was worse than I ever could have imagined. Hello, my name is Alana Brooks and I am 29 years old. Life had become predictable: work, home, occasional outings with friends. Nothing unexpected ever happened, at least until the day I found a white envelope in my mail. The words, "High School Reunion," were printed in bold letters on the front. For a long moment, I just stared at it. High school felt like a lifetime ago, a different world, a different me. There were beautiful memories, yes, but also things I had spent years trying to forget. Did I really want to face the past again? I hesitated, considering just throwing the invitation away. But curiosity won. A few days later, I found myself walking into the reunion venue in Ravenhire. The place was filled with laughter, conversation, the air buzzing with nostalgia. I spotted familiar faces, old friends, people I hadn't seen in years. For a while, I let myself enjoy it. I caught up with classmates, shared memories, and even laughed a little. It felt nice. Then I turned, and I saw him across the room. Standing near a small group of people was Lucas Hart, my first love. The boy who had once meant everything to me. My breath caught. He looked different, older, more confident, but still carrying the same intensity in his eyes. He saw me, and just like that, the years between us vanished. A slow smile spread across his lips as he walked toward me. "Ilana," his voice was smooth, filled with something unspoken. I swallowed hard, forcing a small smile. "Lucas." For a moment, we just stood there, studying each other. Then, as if no time had passed, we started talking. And just like that, everything started again. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Lucas Hart, the boy who once meant everything to me, the boy I thought I had moved on from, was standing right in front of me. There was something surreal about it. He looked older, more refined, but there was still something familiar about him, the way he tilted his head slightly when he smiled, the warmth in his voice. He took a step closer, and my heart pounded. "It's been a long time," he said, his voice smooth, almost hushed. I nodded, searching for the right words. "Yeah, a really long time." For a second, neither of us spoke. It was like there was too much history between us, too much left unsaid. Then, as if something shifted, we slipped into conversation. At first, we spoke about small things: work, where we lived, what we had been up to all these years. He told me he had spent time living in another city but had recently moved back to Ravenhire. I told him about my career, how life had kept me busy but steady. Somehow, the conversation felt easy, as if the years of separation hadn't really changed the way we talked. There was laughter, reminiscing. Moments when we both paused, wondering how life had taken us in such different directions. And yet, here we were, together again. As the night came to an end, I realized how quickly time had passed. I had barely spoken to anyone else at the reunion. It had been just me and Lucas. As people started leaving, Lucas turned to me, looking hesitant. "Eliana," he said slowly, almost carefully, "would you like to have dinner with me sometime, just to catch up properly?" I hesitated. Was this a good idea? Something in his expression told me he was genuinely hoping I'd say yes. There was no harm in one dinner, right? A small smile crept onto my lips. Of course, I'd love to. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't expected, a spark of hope. The days leading up to our dinner were filled with a mix of nervousness and excitement. I told myself it's just a casual dinner, but deep down, I knew that wasn't entirely true. A part of me was curious: had Lucas really changed, Or was I just stepping back into something that was better left in the past? That evening, I arrived at the restaurant, my heart pounding slightly as I spotted Lucas already waiting. He stood when he saw me, his smile warm, familiar. "You look great," he said, pulling out a chair for me. "Thanks," I replied, smoothing my dress. At first, our conversation was light, comfortable. We talked about our favorite movies, our travels, the little things that had filled the last decade of our lives. But then, as the evening went on, the conversation turned deeper. Lucas told me he had been engaged once, but it didn't work out. I told him how I had been too focused on work to think much about relationships. The way he listened, with genuine interest, with patience, reminded me of why I had fallen for him so many years ago. After that night, we started seeing each other more often. At first, it was just casual coffee meetups, long walks, late-night phone calls. But slowly, without meaning to, I found myself drawn to him again. He made me laugh. He made me feel heard. He made me believe that maybe, just maybe, fate had brought us back together for a reason. And before I knew it, I was falling for him again. Months passed. What started as casual meetings slowly turned into something more serious. Lucas and I had become inseparable. It felt like we were rewriting our past, this time with a happier ending. He was attentive, kind, and always there for me. He would bring me my favorite coffee when I was having a rough day. He would listen when I talked about my dreams. It felt real. It felt safe. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself believe in love again. 6 months into our relationship, Lucas planned a special evening. He took me to a quiet hilltop overlooking the city lights, a place where the sky stretched endlessly above us, painted in deep hues of twilight. I didn't think much of it until I noticed the way he was looking at me. "Eliana," he said, taking a deep breath. I turned to him, smiling. "Yeah?" His hands reached for mine, holding them tightly. "These past 6 months with you have been the most precious time of my life." My heart skipped a beat. "I never thought I'd get a second chance to be with you," he continued. "And now that I have it, I don't want to let it go." Then, to my utter shock, he got down on one knee. A small velvet box appeared in his hand, the diamond inside catching the fading sunlight. "Ilana Brooks," he said, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. "Will you marry me?" I froze for a moment. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. A part of me had never imagined this moment would come. But as I looked into his eyes, hopeful, sincere, my heart made the decision before my mind could. I let out a shaky laugh, tears welling up in my eyes. "Lucas," my voice broke. "Yes. Of course, yes." The moment he slid the ring onto my finger, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: hope. Our wedding was a dream, surrounded by family, friends, love, and laughter. I felt like I was stepping into the happiest chapter of my life. Lucas was perfect, attentive, loving, everything I had ever wanted. And when a few months later, I found out I was pregnant, I thought life couldn't get any better. I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at the pregnancy test, 2 lines, pregnant. A rush of emotions flooded through me: excitement, nervousness, hope. I placed a hand over my stomach, whispering, "I'm going to be a mother." That evening, when Lucas walked through the door, I could barely hold in the news. "I have something to tell you," I said, my hands trembling with anticipation. He raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" I took his hands and placed them over my stomach. "We're having a baby." For a moment, his face was unreadable. Then, a slow smile spread across his lips. "Ilana, that's incredible," he whispered, pulling me into his arms. I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of relief. Maybe life was going to be even more beautiful than I imagined. I had no idea how wrong I was. At first, I convinced myself it was just stress. Lucas had always been a man who prided himself on being strong and in control. But now, he seemed distracted, distant. It started with late nights at work, then the excuses, then the drinking. At first, I ignored it. He was going to be a father, of course, he was nervous. I told myself, he'll adjust. Things will get better. But deep down, a small voice whispered in my head that something was wrong. One evening, Lucas came home smelling of alcohol, his tie loosened, his hair slightly disheveled. I hesitated before speaking. "Lucas, have you been drinking?" He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Yeah, just a little. Work has been hell." I frowned. I don't think drinking every night is a good idea, especially with the baby coming." His expression darkened. "So what?" he muttered. "Are you keeping tabs on me now?" The sharpness in his voice made me flinch. "No, of course not," I said quickly. I worry about you." For a second, his jaw tensed. Then he let out a dry chuckle. "You worry too much." He walked past me and disappeared into the bedroom. Something about the way he dismissed me sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't the Lucas I knew. Over the next few weeks, the drinking continued. Lucas came home later and later. When he did, he barely spoke to me. When I tried to ask him what was wrong, he'd just say, "I'm tired, just drop it." I told myself he was just under pressure, that he would come around. But the distance between us only grew wider. Then one night, it happened. It happened on a night that started like any other. Lucas came home late, his tie undone, the smell of alcohol lingering in the air. I was sitting in the kitchen, waiting. I had told myself tonight we would talk. We needed to fix this. So when he walked in, I took a deep breath. "Lucas, we need to talk." He let out a heavy sigh, tossing his keys onto the table. "Not now, Eliana. I'm exhausted." I stood up, blocking his path. "No, Lucas. This can't wait." My voice was firm but calm. "You're drinking too much. You're coming home late every night. I feel like you're avoiding me." His expression hardened. "Why do you always have to make things worse?" His voice was low, cold. I swallowed. "I'm not trying to." "You're always complaining," he interrupted, his voice rising. "I work all day, and I come home to this. To you nagging me." I felt my chest tighten. "This isn't nagging, Lucas. I'm your wife. I love you. I want to know what's wrong." He stepped closer, his eyes dark, unreadable. "What's wrong?" He let out a sharp laugh. "You. This life. This mess." My breath caught in my throat. Mess? What was he saying? I barely had time to process his words before his hands struck my face. Pain exploded across my cheek, the force of it sending me stumbling backward. For a moment, I was too shocked to react. Lucas froze, his own hands still raised. His face twisted, not in regret, not in shame, but in something else. For the first time in our marriage, I saw it, a man I did not recognize. A man I had never truly known. Tears welled in my eyes. I wanted him to say something, to apologize, to tell me it was a mistake. But he didn't. He just turned away. And in that moment, something inside me broke. I wasn't just hurt, I was afraid. And the worst part? I still loved him. After that night, I told myself it was just a mistake. Lucas had been stressed, drunk, not himself. He would never do it again. At least that's what I wanted to believe. But the truth was much darker. Because it did happen again. And again. And again. The first slap turned into a shove. A shove turned into a hard grip on my arm. Then came the screaming, the insults, the anger that exploded out of nowhere. It was like walking on eggshells. Some nights, he would come home normal, almost loving, like the Lucas I used to know. Other nights, I barely recognized him. One moment, he'd be calm. The next, he'd be furious. I started hiding the bruises, wearing long sleeves, avoiding people. I became a prisoner in my own home, but I told myself I had to stay strong for my baby. Even as my body ached from the bruises, even as my heart broke a little more each day. One evening, Lucas came home drunker than ever. His tie was loose, his breath reeking of whiskey. I was in the kitchen, cooking dinner, trying to act normal. I heard the door slam shut, and a heavy silence filled the air. Then his voice, low and dangerous. "Ilana." I turned slowly, my heart pounding. "Yeah?" He stepped closer, his eyes cold, sharp, empty. "You're ruining my life." I frowned. "Lucas, what are you talking about?" He exhaled sharply, his hands clenched into fists. "I never wanted this." He grabbed a glass from the counter and threw it across the room. The shattering sound echoed. I flinched, stepping back. Then suddenly, he shoved me hard. My body slammed into the kitchen counter, pain shooting through my back. But the worst part? A sharp, horrible pain exploded in my stomach. I gasped, my hands flying to my belly. Something was wrong. Terribly, terribly wrong. "Lucas." My voice was barely a whisper. "Something's wrong." For a moment, he just stood there. Then, to my horror, he turned around and walked away, like I was nothing. Like he didn't care if I lived or died. And that's when I knew, if I didn't leave tonight, I was going to die. The pain in my stomach was unbearable. A deep, sharp ache spread through me, making it hard to breathe. I could feel it, something was terribly wrong. I tried to call out for Lucas again, but he was already walking away, his footsteps fading down the hall. He didn't even turn back. He didn't care. Tears blurred my vision as I struggled to stay upright. I had to get help. I had to get out. I pressed a trembling hand against the counter and forced myself to stand. Every movement sent fresh waves of agony through me, but I had no choice. I staggered toward the door, grabbing my coat and my phone with shaking hands. The pain was getting worse. I had to move now. Stepping outside into the cold night, I fought against the dizziness. I barely made it to the street before my knees buckled. A car passed by, then another. Nobody stopped. My heart pounded in panic. What if I collapsed right here? What if no one helped me? Then finally, a taxi pulled up to the curb. The driver, a middle-aged man, rolled down his window. "You okay, miss?" he asked. I gasped, gripping the door handle. "Hospital," my voice was weak, desperate. "Please, just take me to the hospital." He must have seen the pain on my face because he didn't ask any more questions. The moment I slid into the seat, my body gave out. I leaned against the door, clutching my belly. "Hold on," the driver said. "We'll be there soon." But every second felt like a lifetime. The pain was worsening. My vision was starting to blur. I could feel myself slipping. And just as the bright lights of the hospital came into view, everything went black. I woke up to the sound of soft beeping. The air smelled sterile, cold, a hospital. For a moment, I didn't remember what had happened. Then the pain, the fear, the baby. Panic surged through me as I sat up too fast, making the room spin. A gentle voice spoke. "Ilana, slow down. You just woke up." I turned my head, seeing a doctor standing beside my bed. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach. "No, no, no, no." I grabbed the doctor's arm, my voice shaking. "My baby. What happened to my baby?" The doctor's face changed, softer, sadder. "Ilana," she hesitated. "I'm so sorry. We couldn't save your baby." The world collapsed. Everything inside me shattered. My chest felt tight, my breath ragged. "No, I whispered, shaking my head violently. No, you're wrong. I pressed a hand to my stomach, but it was flat, empty. A sob tore through me. It was real. My baby was gone, and Lucas had done this to me. I was still lying in that hospital bed, too weak to move when a police officer entered the room. I barely looked at him. I didn't care. What was the point? My baby was gone. My life was over. The officer cleared his throat. Miss Brooks, the hospital contacted us after you were admitted. Your injuries suggest domestic abuse. I flinched at the words. I hadn't told anyone. I had spent months hiding it, making excuses, pretending it wasn't happening, and now I couldn't pretend anymore. I nodded slowly. The officer stepped closer. Do you want to press charges? I thought about Lucas. I thought about how he had left me there, knowing I was in pain, how he hadn't even bothered to check if I was alive. A rage, unlike anything I had ever felt before, burned through me. I lifted my head, meeting the officer's eyes. Yes, I said. I want him arrested. And this time, I wasn't going to back down. The days after I lost my baby felt like a blur. The grief was unbearable, a deep, aching emptiness that wouldn't go away. But underneath the pain, something else burned, rage. Lucas had taken everything from me. He had broken me, beaten me, destroyed the life growing inside me, and I wasn't going to let him get away with it. The police took my statement in the hospital. I told them everything, the drinking, the anger, the abuse, how he had shoved me against the counter knowing I was pregnant, how he had watched me collapse in pain and walked away. The officer nodded as he scribbled down notes. We'll issue a warrant for his arrest. But I wasn't done yet. I needed more. I needed proof that Lucas wasn't just an abuser, he was a monster. To get that, I had to find the woman he had been cheating with. I had heard her name from the police. They had discovered Lucas had been seeing another woman for months. At first, I hated her. But something in my gut told me she might be a victim too. So I found her address and went to see her. When she answered the door, she looked terrified. Her eyes flickered with recognition. You're Lucas's wife, she whispered. I swallowed the anger rising in my chest. I need to talk to you. It's about Lucas. Amber hesitated, then opened the door. For a few moments, we just sat in silence. Then suddenly, she started crying. I didn't know, she whispered, covering her face. I swear, I didn't know what he was planning. I stiffened. What do you mean? I asked. She wiped her eyes and took a deep breath. I overheard him talking to someone, she said, her voice shaking. He was planning to get rid of you. He had taken out a life insurance policy in your name. My blood ran cold. Lucas hadn't just been abusive, he had been planning to kill me. Amber pulled out her phone and showed me text messages where Lucas talked about how he didn't need me anymore, how he wished I would just disappear, how soon he would have enough money to start fresh. That was all I needed, proof that Lucas wasn't just dangerous, he was a murderer in the making. I took a deep breath and looked at Amber. If you want to make this right, help me. She nodded, determination replacing her fear. Let's take him down. The evidence against Lucas was undeniable. Between Amber's messages, my hospital records, and my police statement, we had everything we needed to make sure he never hurt anyone again. The police issued a warrant for his arrest, but there was one problem: Lucas had disappeared. The moment he realized I had survived, he ran. He left his job, his apartment, his entire life in Raven's Hire. For weeks, the police searched for him, but he was always one step ahead. I barely slept, knowing he was still out there, free. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I was angry, and I was determined. One night, I got a call from Detective Harris, the officer in charge of the case. Ilana, he said, his voice urgent. We found him. My breath caught. Where? I asked. A motel outside the city. We're moving in for the arrest now. I closed my eyes, my hands trembling. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. The moment justice would finally be served. They found him alone in a rundown motel. His mistress, Amber, had abandoned him. His money was running out, and now the police were outside his door. When they burst in, he tried to fight back, tried to lie his way out. But the moment the officers showed him the text messages, the insurance fraud, the abuse reports, he knew it was over. As they dragged him out in handcuffs, he looked up and saw me standing there. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. He knew he had lost. Lucas Hart was finally behind bars. But I knew this wasn't over. I needed to see him face justice. I needed to hear the verdict with my own ears. I had lost my child. I had nearly lost my life. Now it was time to end this nightmare once and for all. The day of the trial, the courtroom was packed. The air was heavy, tense. The entire town wanted to know the truth about Lucas Hart. I sat in the witness stand, my hands gripping the edge of the chair as the prosecutor questioned me. Ilana, can you tell us what happened the night of the attack? I swallowed hard but held my ground. He threw me against the counter, I said, my voice steady. I begged for help, but he walked away. In the defendant's seat, Lucas sat stone-faced. He wouldn't even look at me, but I didn't need him to. He was trapped now. The prosecution presented the evidence, the text messages, the insurance fraud, the hospital reports. Piece by piece, his entire plan unraveled. Then came the final blow, a recording Amber had secretly made of one of her last conversations with Lucas. His voice echoed through the courtroom. Finally, goodbye. I don't need the brat. A sharp gasp rippled through the crowd. Lucas's face paled. That was it, the final nail in his coffin. When it was his turn to speak, he stood up. This is ridiculous, he said, shaking his head. I loved my wife. This is just a misunderstanding. I felt my stomach twist. Even now, he was lying. But the judge wasn't fooled. Lucas's lawyer tried to argue for a lesser sentence, claiming he was under stress, that it was never his intention to harm me. But the prosecutor shut it down immediately. Lucas Hart didn't just harm his wife, the prosecutor said. He nearly killed her. And he did kill their unborn child. A silence filled the courtroom. The judge exhaled slowly, then looked at Lucas. Do you have anything to say for yourself before I deliver your sentence? Lucas clenched his jaw, his eyes burning with anger. But for the first time in his life, he had no control and no way out. The judge's voice rang through the courtroom. Lucas Hart, you've been found guilty of multiple charges, including attempted murder, domestic violence, and insurance fraud. Lucas's jaw tightened. I held my breath. For your crimes, this court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. A sharp gasp rippled through the courtroom. Lucas's head snapped up. Pure panic filled his eyes as the guards dragged him away. He shouted my name, begging, pleading, but I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I just watched him go. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Lucas was gone. Walked away, forgotten. He would never hurt me again. For the first time in years, I could breathe. But freedom didn't mean I was okay. The wounds Lucas left weren't just on my skin, they were inside me, deep, invisible scars. And healing wouldn't happen overnight. After the trial, I moved back in with my parents. I needed time. Time to grieve. Time to rebuild. Some nights I woke up screaming, trapped in nightmares. Some days I could barely get out of bed. But slowly, I fought my way back. I started therapy. I talked about the pain I had hidden for so long. I learned that what happened wasn't my fault, and most importantly, I learned to forgive myself. One day, I looked in the mirror and asked myself, what now? I had survived, but I didn't want to just exist. I wanted to live. So I made a decision. I trained to become an advocate for domestic abuse survivors. I started speaking at events, helping other women find the courage to leave. I shared my story, hoping it would save someone else. And every time I helped another survivor escape their nightmare, I felt stronger. For a long time, I believed I would never love again. That I was too broken, that no one could ever love someone with my past. But then I met Daniel Cross. He wasn't like Lucas. He was kind, patient, safe. He didn't try to fix me, he just stood beside me. And slowly, I let him in. We took things slow. I told him everything. And one day, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. Years passed, and one day, something happened that I never thought I'd experience again. I became pregnant. The moment I saw the test, my hands shook. I was terrified. But then Daniel took my hands in his and whispered, "We'll cherish this baby together, Aliana. I promise." For the first time in years, I felt safe. And when I held my child in my arms, I knew I had survived. And I would never let the past define me again. This story isn't just about pain. It's about resilience, about finding the strength to leave, about knowing that no matter how broken you feel, you can heal. Because in the end, survival is the greatest revenge. And I survived. If you enjoyed this story and found it inspiring, don't forget to like this post to show your support, comment below, and share your thoughts. I'd love to hear from you. Subscribe to stay updated with more powerful stories like this one. Your support means the world. Thank you for being a part of this journey.